everyone, and you're listening to the Millennial Scholar. And today I'm here to talk to you about something that I wish I didn't have to talk about, but it's impossible to ignore. And it's been the reality of a lot of our lives. And when I say our, I'm talking about Black people in this moment, because as a lot of us have seen over the past 2 weeks, there's been international Black Lives Matters protests, which were started due to the due to the murder of George Floyd at the hand of the police in the United States. And it's been quite devastating that, yet again, we're back here talking about this because another Black life has been lost, another Black body has been devalued. And it almost feels strange and even more heartbreaking to have to be protesting the value of Black lives in the moment of a pandemic, because it feels like a lot of the discourse around the pandemic has been how we save as many people as possible and how we, save our societies. But here we find ourselves back to business as usual with the killing and the murder of Black people at the hands of the police and police violence. When do they take a break? When does the institution pause and stop devaluing Black lives? And I ask that question rhetorically because the answer is never. It's been a consistent pattern for a very long time, and yet again we find ourselves raising our voices and demanding to be heard that our lives matter. They have always mattered. It's just a shame that the institution fails to recognise that. There's so many things I want to say. I could probably rant for a very long time in this video, but I won't, because the purpose of this video is to sort of share my thoughts and opinion of some of the things that I've seen. So yeah, I'm going to just talk about a few things and avoid the rant. I also think it's important to mention that given the fact that we are in this pandemic, now is a great time to demand to demand justice, and to demand that we have equality, and to demand that our lives are valued. I see a lot of the things surface on the internet talking about how the protesters are opening us up again to another, lockdown because of outbreaks of COVID-19. But this pandemic has shown us a lot of the people who have been dying have been Black people and people of colour. So when it comes to our health, there's no value of our lives. When it comes to policing, there's no value of our lives. So now is a perfect time to demand that our lives are valued. So yeah, some of the things that have got me in the past 2 weeks have been the things that I've seen on the internet and social media. And being on lockdown, that's probably been a lot of my my go-to for information. But I've also been careful to not overload on information, especially this time round. And to anyone else who may be listening, or anyone out there who may have guilt for not sometimes over-consuming the images and what we're seeing of Black lives being devalued, please don't feel guilty, because although I've also struggled with my guilt, I had to remind myself that it's also important to protect myself, especially in this moment. But I'll get on to why later. I really want to just keep this video about highlighting that racism kills in every way. Just like a pandemic, just like the coronavirus, racism kills, is killing, and will continue to kill until we do something about it. So yeah, first of all, police brutality. Police brutality has been a long history of the relationship the police have had with the Black community in the US and in the UK. The police force was started in the US actually to protect slave owners, and they were started off as slave catchers. So once you start off an institution based on slavery, based on racism, it's impossible for anyone or people to even try to argue the logic that the police aren't racist. The police are inherently racist because they were started based on racism, so we can't ignore that. Many people, again, we're having this conversation about whether or not this is a UK problem, because our police don't kill people publicly on videos and are recorded. But our police still kill people. Police violence, police brutality is still an issue we're dealing with here in the UK. A very long history of police violence. The riots that took place in the 80s around the nation, in London, Bristol, Liverpool, and Leeds, were all because of the over-policing of black communities and Asian communities. It was because of the police violence that these protests and riots continue to happen. Again, the riots in 2011 after the killing of Mark Duggan and the failure to hold anyone accountable for that killing, again sparked anger and sparked series of protests and riots. So it's impossible to ignore the relationship police brutality has with racism and the long history it has with black communities. It's also, given that we're in a pandemic, it's also important to highlight the impact police brutality and police violence has on black people physically, mentally and psychologically. It very much impacts black health. If we're talking about a history of police violence and police brutality, just think about the trauma that has been caused on these communities. The mistrust of the police, the fear of the police are all caused because of the over-policing of these black communities. I'm not here to argue with racists or to argue with white people to justify what's been happening. Information's out there. People, feel free to educate yourself on the history, especially the history in the UK, if you doubt that this is not a UK, or if you doubt that this is also a UK problem. I think it's important that you go and educate yourself as to the over-policing of black communities in the UK. So I think in this moment, that we're now seeing these protests and a discourse again about police brutality, we need to continue to talk about the over-policing of black communities. We won't address police brutality or police violence if we can't address how black communities are over-policed. One of the campaigns that I'm supporting, I take part in with my work in the Racial Justice Network, is the Stop the Scan campaign. I'll put links in the bio so you can find out more about the campaign. But essentially this campaign, it was launched and started because the police in the UK now have mobile fingerprint devices that they use on people they suspect or doubt their identity or suspect them of a crime. We know that it's often people from black communities that the police suspect of a crime. We also know that it's often people of colour the police doubt their identity. So again, the use of these devices, like Stop and Search, is going to be disproportionately used on people of colour, especially black people. So in order to call attention to the over-policing of these black communities, of migrant communities and people of colour generally, we need to take part or recognise some of the things that are happening at the moment and take part in some of the campaigns that are currently happening to address them, and not stop talking about it. Even if they're not listening, even if they refuse to listen, we must keep talking about it. I mean, we've been working on this campaign for 2 years and I don't think many people know that these devices are being used. People are aware of the face recognition devices, but not of these fingerprint devices. So again, if you can find out more about the campaign, find out if your local police force is using the devices, please put pressure on your local police force to stop using these devices, but also on your elected members to scrutinise the use of the devices and who they affect and who they're most likely to affect, because we all know who that is. Secondly, I wanted to talk about the protest versus riots debate. Again, this has been another conversation that has been going on for a very long time. I remember I did my undergraduate dissertation on the Watts riot, and even during the Watts riot, there were people talking about rioters as being mindless, just sporadic, you know. They treated the protesters, should I say, like they were mad for no reason, and they were like crazy headless chickens just running around. Hi, baseball. like they were crazy headless chickens just running around. So this discourse that has tries to demonize protesters by seeing them as mindless looters or mindless rioters has been a tactic again used by the system, by the institution, by racists, by white people who fail to understand what's going on, to really erase the message that they're trying to get across, which is give us equality, give us justice. So every riot that happens that has black people in it or that has people of colour, all is again susceptible to being counted as being mindless and being riots. And I think it's important that we don't fall for this trap. We don't fall for the trap of having this discourse that puts protesters as rioters. The two are not the same. Protesters are people who are trying to get their voices heard and make sure that the momentum we have at the moment with all these businesses and all these brands and all these white people in positions of power claiming they're not racist, trying to get validated as not being racist. It's important that whilst we're in this moment that we don't fall into that discourse of seeing writers and protesters as being one and the same. And wherever we see this course happening, I don't even respond to it. I don't take part in it, because I think that is what keeps this narrative going. And we're in 2020 now. It's time this narrative of protesters being rioters and being mindless ends, because if we for years have been screaming that our lives do not matter, I don't understand why people are surprised that we are back in this moment screaming that again. And this sort of brings me to the last point that I wanted to talk about, and that's what I'm seeing with people trying to explain and simplify why it is Black Lives Matter and not All Lives Matter. I find that whenever I'm seeing these discourses take place on my social media accounts, I'm still just like boggled, and my mind is blown that we still have to explain to people why Black Lives Matter. The notion of people saying all lives matter is to discredit the conversations and the discourse of police brutality, of police violence, because a lot of people are trying to say, oh yeah, but police kill white people too, but not as much as they kill black people. And the fact that we still have to over explain ourselves to these people is getting tiring, not only for myself to do because I don't take part in it anymore, but to constantly see. And it feels like with these protests, a lot of the explanation has been on trying to get people to understand why Black Lives Matter. And I think we need to go beyond that. Whilst we need to treat each other with kindness, and yes, some people prior to these protests may have been ignorant and they might have been educated by these protests, I also think it's important that we don't spend too much attention on trying to explain why it is Black Lives Matter and not All Lives Matters. Some of the simplified analogies I've seen have been quite entertaining and have been perfect to sort of explain what's going on. One of my favourite was the idea that if you're having a birthday party and someone walks into your birthday party and says, oh, what about my birthday party? Or you're attending a funeral and someone walks into that funeral saying, what about my funeral? But it's crazy that we've got to have these simplified explanations for people to get it. And as much as I hope that a lot of people who may have had, who may have been undercover racist or ignorant, should I say, are learning something in this moment, that's not where my hopes are lying. And I don't think that's where a lot of the people who are involved in the protest and in the activism to make sure Black Lives Matter, I don't think that's where a lot of our hopes are lying. Sort of having these back and forth debates with the All Lives Matter camp and the Black Lives Matter camp in some way detracts from the message that needs to be gotten across, which is that we won't stop until Black Lives Matter. Not that you need to understand why Black Lives Matters. If people don't understand, that's on you again to educate yourself. I'll leave articles at the end in the bio so you can go and do that education yourself. But we need to again continue with this momentum of demanding justice and demanding that Black lives are valued and that Black lives matter. But yeah, those are a few things that I've seen, and those are my thoughts on a few things. But I did a podcast. My last podcast was with Dr. Katusha Bento, where we were talking about the coronavirus and the pandemic and some of the victims of the pandemic. And at the end of that podcast, you know, I felt quite hopeful and positive. And in this moment, I am still feeling quite hopeful and positive that the protests that are happening now are sparking a change, or will spark a change, because I've spoken to a lot of people and I've heard a lot of people say this, but I do feel like there's something different about the protest this time round. Whether or not that difference will be sustained beyond the news cycle and, you know, beyond this moment, we're yet to see. But I'm hopeful that a lot of people who I hadn't seen previously talking about racism so openly are now talking about racism, engaging in conversations. I am a bit... And even the fact that, you know, big organisations are sort of speaking up on the protests and are showing their support is positive, and, you know, it's a good thing. But again, we've got to sprinkle a little bit of cynicism on that, because it feels like in this moment a lot of companies and organisations and people are trying to feel validated, and whether or not we validate them and, you know, cuddle them and tell them, oh no, you're not racist, is up to us. But I don't think it's up to, I say us, it's up to you as individuals or what you choose to do. I don't personally feel like that's what we should be doing. I feel like we need to believe Black people, listen to Black people, learn from Black people, love Black people, and not try and validate these celebrities and organisations that are trying to shed their white tears to tell us how unracist they are, or, you know, how accepting they are of everyone. Your colourblindness serves us no purpose. Your colourblindness serves us no justice. What helps is doing. What helps is speaking up. What helps is holding our institutions and those who have power to account. There's a movement to defund the police. There's been several movements that say we don't need the police. And I myself am with those movements, because the police have shown us time after time, year after year, that they can't police themselves. So if they can't police themselves, I cannot trust them to police us. And I think we as a society need to do better to holding each other to account. But most importantly, those people who sit up there, who make the decisions, we need to hold them to account. But yeah, that's my 2 pence on everything that's going on. Please also, like I said, that it's important to learn, it's important to educate ourselves. So if you do have any articles or any learning materials you want to share, please do share. I will also be adding some articles to the bio so people can understand more theoretically some of the things that I've spoken about. Sometimes I want to like come on here and talk about theory, but I'm not trying to bore anyone. And I think it's important that people do the work to learn about theory themselves, because although we know what's happening in practice, this is our lived experience, but sometimes delving into academia or some of the scholarly thoughts about racism, police brutality and police violence, it helps us understand more about things that we might not potentially always think about, and it takes away the focus on arguing with all lives matter on the internet, and hopefully gives people more drive to hold the institutions to account. So thank you very much for listening. You've been watching and listening to the Millennial Scholar. Tukupa moja kabisa.